And just to say good morning and welcome to everyone. I think Wilt has joined there, and right, I saw you on, Will. You're good, Wilt. Okay, awesome. I'm in a different time zone as well, so I'm in the West Coast, and you guys are all over the place. So thank you so much to everyone. Just a couple of little things about our change in our town hall. Today, March 19th, town hall is at 8 a.m., but we're going to change the next town hall in April to 3 p.m. So we'll be sending out another message to everybody to let you know, just with the time change. So just a couple of updates for people. Just about our meeting. You would have gotten your notices now. We're all excited about planning for the next meeting. And people are going to be working hard. Hard to believe that it's only, 14 months away. It's crazy that this is like middle of March. Time goes so fast. And today, as you know, we've set up our, we're going to be changing a little bit of our workbook. We're reworking the handbook. So stay tuned because we've been working, particularly Shauna, really hard with our method stuff in the background. And we're going to have an updated domain selection and instrument selection workbook. And the handbook is going to be updated as well. So we'll let everybody know when that happens. And just to remind you about letting people know or looking at them again yourself from their OMERED. It's my favorite part. Just all the e-learning modules that you can send out to people. And I remind people this every time I'm on a working group call, and they're always like email me in the background going, what did you say about that lovely patient engagement e-learning module? So these are excellent. Shauna probably will be, I think we're going to be working on a binning and winnowing as well, and updating some other ones. So stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date, but please feel free to share these with anyone because people really enjoy them. And they're my favorite. Just again, lots of resources available on our website. Make sure that you send people or keep up to date with the wonderful newsletter that Shauna sends out at the end of each month. And if there's anything that you want to add to those newsletters, if people are doing a surveys, we all we'll put them into the newsletters. So we've got lots of resources on our website and your own websites, for each of the working groups. So please, please, please share those and have a look at the things. So we're going to change the format. We've changed our format a little bit, and we're going to have a methodological specific issue or session on each of our town halls now. So very, very happy today that we're going to have Bing doing our introduction to binning and winnowing. And that was like the highlight of the Colorado Springs meeting. People started talking about it. It's been incorporated into our methods. Several of you on in the background that I've been working with a working group. So several of you on here today have been working on that with your working groups. So Wills was really nice to volunteer to do the example from our lupus group, and he's going to talk after Bing. And I think several of the others, I think Dana's on from our Sjogren's group, and several others have questions about that. So we're really happy, and thank you both again. So Bing, we'll turn it over to you. Unless you have any questions, anyone have questions? And then, like I said, we'll have time for general questions as well at the end. Great. Okay, over to you, Bing. Thank you.
All right. Can everybody see this trash?
Perfect. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to talk to all of you today about this topic that I went over at the last OMERAC meeting in terms of binning and winnowing. So one of the things that we have encountered looking at numerous groups going through Delphi's is that some groups would have over 100 items or 100 different domains that would be brought to a Delphi. And it's just absolutely impossible for people to prioritize and sort that many items. And one of the things that I was familiar with is this process called binning and winnowing, which was developed when the Promise item bank was being developed for various domains, where basically they had collated all of the items, the individual questions that had been used as part of each quality of life instrument that they were looking at for a given domain. And they developed this process where they would go through and look at an item level and decide, were these things related to one another? Were these overlapping types of items? Could we collapse them into a single question? And were there things that just didn't make sense and wouldn't be good as measurement instruments? So this process was first described by in the original Promise development of their item bank. And I thought that it would be actually a good process for us to try to apply as groups came through the Delphi in a slightly different manner, but trying to decrease the number of quote unquote domains or subdomains or concepts that we were trying to measure as we took those, or trying to rate as we took those through a Delphi exercise. So the first broad idea that I wanted to share with you is this idea of binning. So bins are buckets or things that you put together, like a trash bin is sort of where this comes from. So binning, if you look at go to an airport or go to your garbage dump or whatever, you'll see that there are multiple different bins for different types of items that are available, glass or recyclables or trash or other types of things. So the idea with binning is, as you take a look at a number of different items, concepts, or things that are coming out of your initial Delphi exercise, can you take things and put them into larger categories? So the examples, and I'll take you through a couple of examples, but this becomes problematic when, if you go through a qualitative exercise, for instance, and you have patients that say, I have difficulty sleeping, I have difficulty falling asleep, I have difficulty staying asleep, and you put all three of those items into a Delphi, they are all measuring the same concept, which is sleep. And if sleep was actually something that would be important, you may have diffusion of that concept by having so many different ways of measuring it that none of those items rose to being important. So this first concept of binning is putting like things together into larger categories that would be more akin to a domain that we think about it, rather than thinking about individual items or individual descriptors of items. So one of the things that's very interesting in preparing for a binning exercise is to go to some existing framework that gives you a listing of the different types of things that we would consider domains. So this is the Promise framework, for instance. And as you see on the right-hand side, Promise has been broken down into physical, mental, and social health, which are just very meta areas of evaluation. And then you can come down further and break those into symptoms, function, affect, behavior, cognition, relationships, and function as you go down in terms of different types of health. And then you can further subcategorize those. And ultimately, you come to what are smaller measurable domains. So for each of these measures on the right, or each of these domains on the right-hand side, there are measurement instruments that measure that concept, but don't overlap with the other concepts that are listed in this domain list. So I find this a very useful way to orient, especially around looking at health-related quality of life, of thinking about how you might put things in bins and characterize and group things together. Now, one of the problems is that if you're working with qualitative researchers and they are doing a qualitative analysis, they are doing what's called a thematic analysis. But those people who are doing that qualitative research, by and large, are not trained in the methodology that we are working in, which is trying to think about, can something actually be measured? Is it feasible to measure this construct? They are putting together themes of things, and they may not have overlap with how we characterize our domains. So, there is sort of an unstructured, way of doing qualitative analysis where you don't go in with any pre-existing types of things. But what you end up with is a lot of stuff that doesn't work within our framework. So we have to have this place at which we say, this qualitative analysis is good, it's extremely rich, but we have to map this onto a construct that is relevant to measurement and relevant to how we conceptualize things like health-related quality of life. So the PROMIS framework is one. There's WHO and others, but again, it's this idea of how we can sort of get things to be broader concepts that we're trying to measure. So I skip over this. So this is an example of a list of 35 different things that came out of this is not even a complete list of what came out of an exercise from one of the groups. But as you see, there are things that difficulty falling asleep, pain that limits activities, feeling sad or anxious, trouble dressing, extreme exhaustion, trouble grocery shopping, trouble staying asleep. These were the items that came out of qualitative analysis. But this is a list of 35 things. And as you look through this list, you can see that a lot of these things are related to each other in ways that if you think back to that PROMIS sort of domain framework, you can begin to take things and put them into those different categories very easily. So this list is a combination of things that can be binned and also a combination of things that can be winnowed. And we'll talk more about winnowing as we move along. But basically taking this list of 35 items, and we did this when we were at the last OMERAC meeting, we were able to reduce those into 13 more traditional domains that we would think about. So let's go through, so again, physical function, sleep disturbance, pain interference, pain severity, fatigue, social participation, depression, anxiety, cognitive difficulty, stiffness. So things that, again, might map onto that domain framework more readily. So let's go through a few of these examples, and I put these into the chapter 4 of the handbook in the newest version of it. So I'll take you through some of these examples. So out of the qualitative analysis comes, I can't seem to get a good night's sleep anymore, okay? So you also have difficulty falling asleep, and you have trouble staying asleep. So all of these are descriptors, though, of sleep disturbance. So all of those 3 items don't need to go into the Delphi independently. You can group all of those legitimately into a single concept or domain that would be, in this case, sleep disturbance. Okay? And then other examples, fatigue, people talking about extreme exhaustion, people talking about no energy or zip. All of those would fit within that framework of that domain definition that we have for fatigue. So again, trying to get from granularity at a very granular level, and those are very important descriptors that would need to be reflected in your ultimate instrument that you were choosing to measure that, but they're not what people need to vote on in terms of a Delphi exercise. And then there's some that are a little bit more confusing, things like brain fog, okay? Now, brain fog arguably is not a well-described concept that we can measure, in my mind, because this could be emotional and mental well-being, or it could be cognitive function. So this is one of those examples of something that, as we move to winnowing, something like brain fog as a concept may be very difficult to map onto a single domain because it is a complex construct that is not easily definable within a single type of construct. But for the sake of this, again, you could take something like brain fogging. You could say, well, maybe it goes into this bin, maybe it goes into this bin. Let's think about that a little bit later down the line. And then feeling like the 10-man, trouble going, getting going because of stiffness, can't get up the stairs, trouble dressing, all of those related to physical function. So again, just examples of how you can take this type of list and reduce that down to something that becomes manageable or for the Delphi exercise. So are there questions about sort of this concept of binning before I move on to talk about winnowing? All right. So the other things that were in this list out of 13 items, yeah, Robin?
Sorry, Bing. I was, will you get back to who's the expert of this example with the brain fog?
I'm just giving
were
that.
you able to do it? Yeah, okay, sorry.
No, so I'm just giving you, again, what my thoughts are about this. I mean, I think that the point of this type of exercise of binning and winnowing is this is where the group comes in and all of the voices that are within the group weigh in on this. But remember that there is, we're thinking about, number one, what we need to measure. But we also have a requirement at some point in the day that we need an instrument that can measure that. That needs to be a construct that can be measured and can be understood and can be described, and it needs to be feasible to do that. So, we try, in our OMERACT framework, we have things that are divided up about what to measure and then how to measure it and then is it feasible. But it makes some sense in my mind to always incorporate those types of things into your initial exercise, because and that's what winnowing is. Winnowing is sort of using your evaluation of things to begin to further whittle out stuff that just can't fit within our framework or within a measurement type of system. So those things that are over here on the right, we're going to go through some of these. These are things that came out of, again, qualitative type of exercises where patients talked about what bothered them about their condition. And, we'll go through each of these and sort of how you might deal with some of these types of concepts. So the next process is what's called winnowing.
But being just for housekeeping, we don't have guidance about 3 continents needs to be involved and at least 30 patients for this binning exercise?
No, I don't. I think this is the wisdom of the group. I really getting down into that type of stuff, is desirable if you can to be as inclusive as possible, but holding yourself up, to ensure that you have, the numbers of people. I don't know, Dorcas, I mean, you can weigh in on this, but I think the point is that the group is working together using all of the different perspectives as you go through these different processes. The group is engaged, this is not one person in the group that's saying this, but this is a discussion. And the documentation of that discussion is important, of how and why you are making the decisions that you're making, so that you're not criticized at some point for having thrown out the baby with bathwater. Annalise?
No.
You're on mute, Annalise. We can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
No?
Now we can hear you.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I like this presentation, but what I wanted to add is that it also points to the importance of the interview. If you have those concepts like brain fog that you don't understand, that the one that does the qualitative interviews also has to go into that. What do you really mean? And I often experience that qualitative interviews are heavily underestimated, but it also points to the quality of the qualitative interviews. That's what I wanted to say.
All right.
And probably the definitions. So how, I think probably the group's definition, when you go to put it in the Delphi, is going to be key, I would think, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where that sort of qualitative work gives you the descriptors that you can use to construct that definition.
Right, because every group might even be different on that.
Right.
Brain fog is hard.
Brain fog is very hard. It's a concept, but it is a concept that comes over and over from our patients. But it may be something, as we look at it, you know, in more detail, that has difficulty in terms of what that construct actually means and how we may go about trying to measure it.
Yeah, and if you can't measure it in clinic as a physician,
If you can't describe it,
yeah,
you can't measure it.
right.
That's kind of my if you can't say what it is, then how in the world are you going to measure it? Because you have to have a framework for measurement.
Right.
You have to have a formative or reflexive construct if you were going to think about what you were going to measure and what that thing is, what that concept means.
Right.
And if you can't define it, it needs a lot more work done. So let's go on and talk about winnowing, because I think we have some good examples from lupus as well. So winnowing is sort of this next place that you can go, and binning and winnowing are not mutually exclusive processes. You should look at these as things that can be done as you're going through that list. Can we group things together? Can we exclude things at the same time? And I think Wills will show us that they did the winnowing first and then the binning afterwards. And that's all fine. We're talking about sort of two different ideas, and winnowing is the second one. So winnowing is, can we separate what is not going to stick at the end of the day? And are there ways that we can sort of apply this, or are there criteria that we can apply for saying that something needs to fall out of the measurement? So the exclusion that you know have been developed in the past, and the things that we have emphasized, are redundancy. So if there's a lot of overlap with other domains, that's something that you might try to, again, broaden those things, put them together, rather than having a lot of redundancy. And I'll give you some examples of each of these. Is it too narrow? Are there things that are too specific that don't really apply? And I'll show you some examples of that. Are there multifactorial items? So items that are too complex or encompass multiple factors, making them challenging to measure or assess effectively. And that might be something like brain fog, which again is a very complicated construct on its own that is going to be hard. Not, you know, not that it's not important, but actually conceptualizing and developing a definition for that would be very hard for people to know what you were talking about when taking that through a Delphi exercise. Lack of clarity, items or domains that are ambiguous, that could be inconsistently understood, things that are of low importance or relevance. Again, you need to be careful in terms of these, because they've come up through your qualitative activities. But again, I'll give you some examples of these. Are there significant overlap? That's sort of like the redundancy. So what about some examples here? So if we go back to those original things, trouble bending over. So trouble bending over is something that is multifactorial. One could have difficulty bending because of physical limitations, because of joint limitations, because of pain. It's not something that's easily encompassed within physical function or within pain or within other things. So it's kind of a nebulous concept. It's something that came up through qualitative activities, but it's not something that you can necessarily put into any category or domain that we talk about. So that'd be an example of a multifactorial type of thing that probably could filter out of going into the Delphi. Patients describing feeling out of sorts. You know, again, that would be something that came up through qualitative activities as a quotation, but we don't know what that means. it's very vague. It's hard for anybody to understand that in a way that you could vote on that as something being important. And I don't know how you would put that into a given type of domain. Is that patient global assessment? Is that, is that feeling out of sorts because of emotional problems? Is that physical problems that make you feel not right? Again, a very difficult concept. This is one that was real. My eyes are red. And somebody described their eyes are red, and that came out of qualitative activity. But does that apply to if this is something that is, you're looking at joint disease? Now, if you're looking at Sjogren's, this may be something that becomes relevant in terms of an ocular manifestation. But you're not going to put my eyes are red into your Delphi exercise. That's going to be a descriptor of something happening in the eye. So it may be pathophysiological manifestation in terms of eyes, okay? Or it may be eye symptoms that would be more of a health-related quality of life patient perspective type of thing. So feeling like I got run over by a truck. We've all heard this in clinical practice, but what is that? Is that, is that a physical something? Is that emotional? What is that? If we can't define it, we can't really ask people to vote on that. It's a descriptor. It's not a domain. I have to grit my teeth. Another example, why is someone having trouble gritting their teeth? Well, you may grit your teeth because you have bruxism or you may have TMJ dysfunction, or you may be anxious. So again, descriptors, but not domains. So these are example how hard to get going. Now, is that stiffness? Is it because of pain? What is the reason for that? Another multifactorial type of problem. So all of these things are examples of how you may exclude things very legitimately based on sort of those exclusion criteria that we have. And I'm sure you can come up with your own examples, and Will's, I think you have a nice examples for us. So that's where I'm going to end in terms of summarizing. This concept of binning and winnowing, they go together. It's important to simplify your Delphi so that you can get to a manageable number of domains that people can actually vote upon and consider. Binning and winnowing are both important concepts. And, again, the group needs to be involved in this decision making. So I will end there and take questions or move on to Will's, and then we can talk as a group.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Awesome. So it doesn't look like any questions. You got claps from Robin. So Will, it's over to you. Thank you.
Can you see that?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'll be presenting the lupus working group's winnowing and binning that we've done so far. It's just broadly going over. First, some explanation of how we did it. So our advisory group did a lot of the work, and the projects we did to get our domains or items, and then how we kind of started winnowing, though we also did binning at first. We brought some results to the conference, and then we really did a lot of binning at the end. And so I'll be going through all this today. Start with our advisory group. So our advisory group, it's composed of members of our steering committee and other members from our working group that really want to be actively involved in daily tasks. We do have a mix of patient research partners, as well as many of our rheumatologists and clinicians that are quite involved. And it's a smaller group, but not too small. About I think 8 people right now. It's a very good size for getting a lot of work done, having efficient discussions for what we needed to do for like our regular tasks. So for our domain generation, we had 3 projects. We did our domain survey, where we looked at our previous domains from the 1998 lupus core outcome set and their research agenda, and a few additional domains common in lupus research that wasn't included back then. We also did our scoping review on all clinical trials and systematic reviews since 2010, and we have focus groups, multiple focus groups with patients from around the world, asking how lupus impacts them. And so from these 3 projects, we got our initial list of items. And here is just a very small sample, and this is before any winnowing and binning. And this list of items was over 250 long. It was way too long and way too in-depth. You can see some of these items are highly specific and not maybe too narrow, too broad. You know, there are a lot of problems with quite a few of these, as the ones that Braden just showed us. So we need to do a lot of work on this. So what we did first was we started with our winnowing. And so our advisory group met weekly to work down this list. And we reviewed kind of each item and asking, as being said, is it too narrow? Is it too broad? Is it too complex? Is it redundant? And from that, we removed a lot of items. We winnowed them out because we knew they wouldn't stick. They would not fit any criteria. They were overlapping with multiple domains and they weren't specific. And so many items were removed. And we also did some binning here where we took very similar, almost identical items and binned them together. But again, so this brought our list from over 250 down to 150 items. But we're still at 150 items, many of which were too specific and not domains or target domains that we would like yet. And so we needed to do a lot more of that. With that list of 150, we were getting ready for the OMERACT conference, and we found there was also 18 more contextual factors in there. We said we didn't want to bring or continue, so we removed those, and that left us with 132. And so this is a sample of the items we had in that list of 132. And you can see from these ones, you have disease activity, comorbidities, sleep, fertility, pregnancy, satisfaction. Some of these items are a bit more, there are common domains we've seen measured, or they're starting to look more like, but again, we still have a few that are too specific, or something, or concepts that are hard to capture, like tolerability or time consumption. So we took all of these list of 132 items, and we went to the OMERACT 2023 conference where we had our lupus SIG session. And what we did is we split up the 132 items into 4 groups, and we held 4 breakout groups with 3 in person at the session and 1 online. And each group had a facilitator to lead the discussion and a reporter to write down all the comments and results for each item in their list. And each group kind of worked down the list one by one, discussing the item and where it belongs. Is it a domain? Is it a contextual factor? Is this too specific? Is it too broad? Need to be broken up? What had to happen to it? And so that led us finally to begin our binning. So after the conference, we took all these results, and our advisory group met for many weeks to review them. And we started using these comments to bin a lot of these domains or items together and under usually a larger domain. And from this, we ended up reducing our items from 132 to 20. So we really dropped down, but there is some issues with that, and I'm going to be going through that. So here's our preliminary list of candidate domains now, those 20 domains. And we have cognition, fatigue, damage, disease activity, sleep disturbance, sexuality. So many of these are common domains we see measured everywhere, but some of these, as you can see, are quite broad, like emotional health, and we still have health, quality of life, and cognition even is under discussion too. And so I'm going to go through some examples now of, first, a good example of one that we're quite happy with, and then another example of a domain where we've done what we call overbinning. So first, I just want to go over disease activity. So we had all of our items, quite a few. And again, we winnowed out items that were too specific. And here's 2 examples, like validation of diagnosis of symptoms, unpredictability of symptoms. We see, like, we do have symptoms here, and the patient's interpretation of them too, but we also have, this covers a lot of mental and emotional aspects too. And these quite broad items, so they were winnowed out. And we kind of got left with a bunch of items or themes that here's an example that we were like, these kind of all belong together, and these are what we binned into disease activity. And so here, this is our example of disease we were quite happy with. These items seem to go together under this one domain, a target domain that has quite a few measures already to capture it. So this is our example of winnowing and binning that we are quite happy with, but I also want to cover over binning and our example that we're still struggling to tackle. And I'm going to show you a large list of themes here. There's quite a few, and this is way too many to kind of fall under one domain. And specifically, I want to show you that we have items in here like anxiety, depression, and stress, which have been domains on their own and have measures of their own to capture them. So we did have quite a few, like too many items, and some that already can be captured on their own under here. We just, at first, we're discussing it and talking about the overlap and interplay between these domains and how they can often affect each other. And so what we did is when we were binning these, we binned them all under emotional health, and we're still discussing this, and we were wondering, can we suggest a domain and have multiple measures capture it after the Delphi? So bring emotional health to the Delphi, but then suggest multiple measures to capture all of its concepts. Or should it be broken up into the individual ones? And some of our rationale behind why we wanted to bin in such a large domain was, well, the interplay between all of them. Like it is hard to distinguish sometimes what aspects of mental health, emotional health are contributed to what factors, and the attribution to lupus versus other factors, just general life. As well as there was also, if we break these domains up, we break emotional health up, we take anxiety alone, depression alone, stress alone, are they going to, do we really capture their full importance? Like if we bring emotional health with all these important items in there, it kind of brings up its importance, and we can help it to be realized and maybe make the core outcome set. But if we break them up, maybe they're getting too specific and they kind of seem not as important as compared to other domains. And it's how do you draw that line of where to stop binning and over binning or under binning? And so that's the kind of the question I wanted to bring in, let the group discuss, is how to. So with regards to over binning and or under binning, how do we handle or prevent this issue? How can you draw the line and decide where to stop? Yeah, that's all I have. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great. So questions? Yes, claps for sure to both. Robin?
I was wondering, without creating too much trouble, and I apologize because I'm very excited about this, but isn't it like a cheating function to introduce disease activity at this late stage? When I saw your example, it looked almost like the old ACR, EULAR, UMRAC idea of rheumatoid arthritis, ACR 20, that you could call everything then disease activity. So did anyone in your group consider whether it's a too big a bin or actually a garbage can?
Yes, that has been discussed, and we are still conferring about that. I think it can be too big of a garbage can. We are trying to limit it now, like not to put everything under it, but more specific, very specific symptoms and the biomarkers kind of is what we were kind of putting there. And like I'm symptoms that don't fall under any of the other domains is kind of, yeah. So it has been kind of as for everything that doesn't fit, but it is an important symptom, has kind of gone there, like joint swelling and joint swelling, joint stiffness, like stuff like that. That has gone under disease activity for now, but we are still in discussion of what we should do. And I think after making this presentation and working with Bing and then everyone on discussing the winnowing and binning, I'm definitely coming to think some of these could be broken down more, including disease activity. And so we are still discussing it. It is
just for a quick analogy, in the vasculitis group, when I entered that, it turned out that they at some point decided that they had a domain called PRO, and that's clearly not operational for Umerect. So they had as one single domain PROs, and to some extent, Peter Merkel is charming enough on the podium to make it sound reasonable, but I'm not sure it's reasonable in Umerect.
Is the thought that, so this is all from patient perspective, is the thought that if this were to play out, it would be something like patient global assessment of disease activity? Is that theoretically an instrument that could be applied to this?
Absolutely. And actually, we do have patient global and physician global both as the domains we do want to bring forward. I think we're going to have them as their own domains, as well as really using disease activity, really, and relating to like the SLIDA, the Lupus Disease Activity Index. That's kind of like, yeah, how that one defines disease activity is kind of how we are defining disease activity for now. And of course, that's the commonly accepted one, our gold standard so far that's used. So that's kind of where we're leading with disease activity, but patient global and physician global are also definitely domains we're bringing forward. But we realize they can be different actually than just what SLIDA has itself. So
can I bring up my question? I emailed Bing beforehand about, and this is the perfect segue, I think, talking about over versus under binning, winnowing. Now, this isn't for the patient perspective. This would now be for pathophys perspective, but grouping the same concept of disease activity. So the Sjogren's group is going through this, and I see that Sarah just joined in too. We're coming to this group for our answer.
Absolutely.
So now, and I could bring up an Excel file if you want to see example. Now in the Sjogren's group, we're deciding, okay, we have all these different domains for disease activity, pathophys wise. We could group them together and say systemic disease activity, but then you literally are only left with, at the next phase, let's say assuming it goes through Delphi, to have like a composite score, instrument, etc., that is going to be matched to that? Or should we keep them each in their own separate bins, each separate category of disease activity? And I know lupus is going through this, so that's why I'm bringing this up, because Sjogren's is going through this too, and what the thoughts are in that. And if it helps, I could bring up our list of items that we're thinking about for our Delphi, and if anyone has any opinions on that. Just give me 1 second. Let me just bring this up.
Andrea has a question. Do you want to wait till?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Annalise. Andrea?
Hello, thank you. Very, very nice presentations. Thank you for presenting to us. A question that I have is about winnowing. When you reduce the items, if we should really, this should be based on previous research that people have done, and based on that, reduce the items, or using a Delphi or like a consensus group to try to reduce, I think the items is acceptable, because some people prefer to have some results, I think, for example, reliability results, and show items that are not reliable to be able to remove them from the scale or the scoring system, and others not. So what do you think about?
So I'll answer on that. I think, again, this is where, again, this process of binning and winnowing has really been applied at the item level for when you're generating an instrument. So this is all an adoption of what was developed for developing a psychometrically, reliable instrument. But we're sort of applying the same ideas to around defining what are domains. So I don't, if there is good, literature that sort of says that this is not a concept that can be measured, I think that would weigh in heavily into, a decision to winnow that out. But I don't, I think the idea that we're trying to get to is to get to a domain list that is small enough that people can actually reliably rate and evaluate and sort of decide on what should be included and what should not be included. So I think, rather than worry about at the item level of whether or not this would be, responsive and have all of the psychometric characteristics that you would like, for at an item level, that type of information could support a reason why you may want to winnow that out. I don't know if that's clear or not. I don't know, Dorcas, Bev, thoughts?
I'm sort of with you, Bing. I'm agreeing with what you're saying. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to use it at this level, but it was developed from the instrument. But I think it applies really well. And the example here, I mean, this is amazing when I look at what Dana's put up there. Like, where do you go?
Yeah, so just to do the two, so right now we have two versions on, do you group all systemic disease activity together? And we looked at examples of other OMERACT working groups too, and it seems like a lot have done this. Or do you break them out? If you break it, hold on. If you break it out, then you have, a million different domains, all which could be measured. Or do you keep it all together? I don't know what the answer is. If you keep it like this, does it force you into a composite?
A
So-
massive one.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond again to Will's and to Dana in terms of the disease activity. I think we have to think too about what the purpose of our Delphi is, and that's to identify the broad domains that need to be measured in a clinical trial. Okay. If grouping things into these meta domains of disease activity may be appropriate, and it may be appropriate ultimately that the way in which you measure that, the instrument that you use, is going to be a composite measure that somehow is reflective of all of those things that you need to do. But the danger again of breaking out all of these different manifestations and having people vote on them in your first round of Delphi is that you could lose all of them. And you end up with a very truncated list of disease activity. So I've thought a lot about this in terms of, the patient-reported pieces as well as the pathophysiologic manifestations. And I think that, we get into this in the overbending of sort of saying health-related quality of life. Well,
Yeah.
HRQL is all of these subdomains of things. So does it make sense in some ways for us in our first round of Delphi to say that, we know that we need to capture disease activity in some way? That's a concept that we cannot lose. That has to be there. There's no way that you can have face validity if you don't have some measure of disease activity.
Right.
And do we need to think, and I'm just throwing this out here for Dorcas and Bev and others to think about as well, do we need to think about, the Delphi is not the be all and end all, okay? But as the starting place that tells us these are the broad things that we need to measure. But then when we think about how we are going to measure those things, when we move to that instrument phase, we need to do another round of Delphi potentially. Okay, where we say, okay, within pathophysiological manifestations, whether we're dealing with Sjogren's or whether we're dealing with lupus, here are all of the possibilities that may encompass that disease activity. And one route might be moving down the composite outcome measurement, pathway, where we have working groups that are working to define the methodologies of how we would develop that. The other is saying, well, here are the domains that we could measure. Okay, now let's do a Delphi exercise just related to the pathophysiologic manifestations or disease activity and see what surfaces within that group of things that we may have individual measurement instruments to reflect one or another of those different domains. I think there are two different approaches, and I don't think that we've come up with OMERACT as sort of saying that one is right or the other is right. I think if you think about how the FDA conceptualizes a clinical outcome assessment or a COA, they would want you, if you were thinking about developing a composite measure, you would have to set up what that composite measure was what was going to be included within that composite measure, and then demonstrate how you were putting that together to be reflective of that underlying concept. So, you know, that would be one approach. But again, there is a practical approach that says, if we don't have a composite measurement, and developing a composite measurement is going to take us a decade, okay, what can we do in the meantime to reflect this concept of disease activity, and how might we look at the different components of that and prioritize and rate what we can have measurement instruments to look at? So that's my personal opinion. That's not an OMERACT opinion, but it is a way that we can potentially deal with this, of looking at sort of essentially a two-step Delphi process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think that summarizes exactly where the Sjogren's group is to a T. You know, there's one existing composite measure, the SDI, and if we leave it all there, the only available instrument is the SDI. But what do you do in the meantime when it would take so long to then create something, which is fine. I understand that, like, it's a process, but there's a major fork in the road right now. So thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, Loop is the same discussions, so that will just present cognition and same sort of thing. So thank you. Awesome, Annalise.
I would like to explain some of the experience with the axial SPA group. So it was about axial spondyloarthritis, and we did for some parts already in the Delphi what was mentioned by Bing, and that's, for example, is less complex than disease activity, but for example, peripheral manifestations. So if you have the axial manifestations and the peripheral manifestations, and the peripheral manifestations are a domain, but then we already made the second row and we splitted it by arthritis, peripheral arthritis, enthesitis, dactylitis, other. So the second column was conditional on the first. So if you find that peripheral arthritis is important as a domain, then you could choose which of the next ones should be part of that domain. And of course, I realize very much that disease activity is much more complex, and you would get a lot of splits within your Delphi. Axial SPA was an update of an existing core set, and there it was very practical, it was very helpful. But that is also a possibility, I think. And the second thing I wanted to say was for the SLE, whatever you have collected and you have done your binning, I think it's very important and worthwhile to keep it. And you might come to other insights, or for example, I saw something on pregnancy. Perhaps at some point you say, well, pregnancy seems to be another outcome domain that is very important, and you move the things about pregnancy, what is now in quality of life, you move to pregnancy. So I think it could also be a living data bank of domains and items within domains. But it's definitely worthwhile to keep it at some point, if everyone agrees like that, and check later in the phase of your instrument selection what you are missing, or that perhaps you want to change it again. It in my view, it should not be a once and for all domain tree or checklist, but that's also my personal opinion.
I love the idea of the living list, like our living meta-analysis. Did anyone want to respond to Annalise before? Oh, Bing, you're muted.
Dorcas had her hand up.
Yep, Dorcas.
Thanks, Bing. It was another point though, so if anybody wanted to respond to Annalise, that's okay first. Okay, so if not, it's along the same theme.
Great,
And I
thanks.
just wanted to continue with Bing's thoughts to to not get too much into this being the binning at, like we're trying to get rid of sort of item level things, very specific things. And if you think about when people are entering the Delphi, they know in the back that there's this 5 to 7 for a core set. And if you have very, very, very specific things, you might lose your vote on one of the specific things as opposed to disease activity as a concept. So I like to always think about what's going to be ending up in the onion. So we might see disease activity in the onion and then figure out, and I like the idea actually of a second sort of process to really say, okay, let's go back now and think hard about this disease activity concept. What is it that we're trying to measure? What needs to be in a good concept of disease activity? But I wonder whether, because Wills, in your presentation, you were talking about emotional health as another example where you had a lot of binning into this thing called emotional health. And I was wondering if that might be an easier one to sort of talk about over binning versus under binning, whether you struggled with that. And because sometimes I'm seeing separation of depression, anxiety, you had self-efficacy in there, I think. So there's a lot of different, what I would consider domains or concepts within one bin. So we can't measure that one bin if it's got a whole bunch of other things in it. So I'd love to hear your comments on that with Bing's input too.
Yes, well, yeah, we did think about, we had a lot of very great, complicated, and sometimes frustrating circular discussions
Debates.
about this, and how like we've flip-flopped from separating them all, bringing them all together, separating them all. It's gone back and forth, and there's people on both sides in our group that we can't fully agree on which one yet, or come to a great decision. But bringing them all together, it does address that issue of they are very important to patients, but alone, are they going to make a core outcome set or not? It also addresses that they interplay a lot. They're very complicated topics, hard to distinguish, with a lot of confounding factors outside of, like, it's hard to attribute also just specifically to lupus. So we were wondering if we can bring it all together, can you kind of capture that better, get a more holistic sense of it? And that was another idea supporting, putting it all together under emotional health. But then there's also the other side of, now we're putting this all together, can you actually get anything useful, or anything? Is it too much data here, too much information that you can't separate, we can't actually use? And so it is both ways, and we're still undecided.
Maybe I realize a lot of us have a hard stop at 9, including
Bing,
Bing.
thank you so much. He's had to leave.
But I
so-
wonder whether, can we flag this for continuing this discussion about if we have a concept that's a broad concept, how do we know if we've overbinned? Could we flag that for maybe the next town hall?